Hello, Vox, and welcome to the final installment of our 7 Words series. Today we're having a conversation about the last thing Jesus said when he was hanging on the cross. It's a word about spirit, about will, about the surrender of control. And in this conversation today, we're going to not only deal with that word, but we're going to recap some interesting insights, I think, about this entire series. So welcome and enjoy the conversation.
Well, Rustin, it's good to be with you.
Welcome back.
How are you feeling these days?
Overcast.
Okay, good. Yeah,
like the
definitely.
weather.
So our good friend Jonathan Clee, that you, if you're watching the video, you can't see him right now, but he's the technician behind all of this. We couldn't do it without him.
Yeah.
He just said it feels like it's January 74. January 74th.
Yes.
Yeah. Meaning that it just goes on and on. But
this is kind of like this series, this Lent series that is going way past the season of Lent.
Yeah.
But it's just so appropriate. It's the Lent that never ends.
The Lent that never ends, yeah. I am excited, though, to be with you, and I'm excited for us to do this teaching and have this conversation. So, all of that to say, we're in Jesus' final word today, and I'm going to let you take over and introduce that word and talk about it just a little bit before we get into it. And,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, it's the 7th word from the cross,
Yeah.
where Jesus speaks for the 7th time, and we're taking this from Luke 23, 44 through 46. It says this: "It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, 'Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.' When he had said this, he breathed his last." So, a couple of consequential verses there. And essentially, just to get at it, into your hands. This is a word about control. Who's in control? And a word about surrender. So, I think this one, just like so many of the other ones, just so pokes at our sensibilities. And even as Christians, even as people who want to believe that we live by faith and not by our own control, boy, this is difficult for us. And I know just a ton of my friends at Vox would say the same thing. This is something we all struggle with. We just have our sensibility shaped more, I think of like common cultural axioms, like the saying, "a bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush," which is a fun little saying. It's really about control. Better to have what you have than to go for something more, because we'd rather be in control. It's more comforting. I even thought of the question of, or the saying about, I'm thinking about lawns these days, because my father-in-law is helping us with our lawn, because it's terrible.
Okay.
But what's the famous saying about your neighbor's lawn? The grass is...
It's always greener.
It's always greener on the other side.
Yeah.
Which, if you think of that in reverse, what that's really a saying about is control. It's better to have what you have, where you have control, than to give that up for something on the other side that might look better, but it may not be better. Right? So it's the same kind of sensibility. We're just so hardwired to want to control what we have, and everything about that in us works against the Christian life.
Yeah. And it's that need for control is something that's in us, like you said, but it's also all around us. It's the culture we grow up in.
Yeah. So
the conversation that we're having right now, the last 7 words of Jesus, let alone everything about Jesus, is really counterintuitive to the way that we're taught to live. And the way that we're taught is responsible, the way that we're taught to lead. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, Rustin, what we should do is circle back around to this idea of giving control to God when we wrap up, right? So for anyone who clicked on this video and is tempted to stop watching, you're going to have to stick with us to get to this word again.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be good stuff.
Let's go on a journey here.
Let's go on a little bit of a tangent. So much of the conversation we have about the 7 words is wrapped up in language about our false self and our true self. So we've been repeating that over and over again. We talked extensively about it. Even before the virus hit, I was talking about false self, true self, and completely confusing my congregation, probably because I'm confused myself. But yet I know that there's something really true and good here. Yeah. That this is the journey of Christ, and the journey with Christ is a journey to the cross, and that's a journey that involves leaving something that we're calling our false self. I think Scripture sometimes refers to it as our old self, and we're leaning into and putting on the clothes of our true self or our new self.
Okay.
And all that to say, my people, and I totally understand this, a lot of times grapple with this idea, and I don't always know that I'm communicating it very well. Yeah. And people are like, what do you mean? What is the true self? What do you mean? Mm. So in fact, when we started this series, again, it was before the virus hit and our small groups were still meeting together. Mm-hmm. One guy from a small group started texting me questions that the group was coming up with. And I didn't know that he was in a small group. I just, all of a sudden, I started getting these texts that were like, well, what does the true self mean? You know, and so I had silly responses, but I thought what I would do is I'm going to bring his questions to you. Because the truth of the matter is I feel like you explain everything much better than I do. So I'm gonna let you take a shot at this, okay?
Great.
What do we mean by false self and true self? So first question you texted is, what's the difference between your false self versus just trying to be the best version of yourself? Mm. Now,
that's good.
What I've learned to do through the ages is that I tend to respond to questions like this with a question. That's always the best.
Yeah.
So that way you don't have to give an answer.
That's right.
So I'll let you know what I said. I said that was a loaded question. I said it brings up more questions like, what do you mean by the best version of yourself? You know, like that. Yeah. Like we have to figure that out.
Right.
So then he responded, that's a good question. So we have all these good questions. He said, maybe trying to project your deepest ideals. Like if it's who you want to be, so you try to be it, but it takes a constant effort, you know. And now I'm going to let you take over here, but this is what I said just to get it over with. I said this is a slippery slope. I said it's counterintuitive to the way we're taught, but our true self in general isn't related to our efforts to be anything. Yeah. I said it's not that we quit trying to achieve ideals and all that, but we live into a profound truth that those efforts, whether they're successful or whether they fail, aren't really us. Mm. I could be totally wrong, and now you're hearing why my congregation is confused. Okay, so Rustin, take it away. What are we talking about here?
Okay,
how would you respond?
Well, first of all, with empathy, because it is confusing. It's abstract. In fact, this language of true and false self comes from middle 20th century psychoanalytic folks who came up with that term, true and false self. I don't know that it existed before 1960. But the way that we've used it in the church is to not try to completely be accurate to that theory of true and false self, but to pick up a thread that runs from modern thought back through, even Freud and the idea of the ego, and but as you said, back through Scripture and the idea of what did you call it? The new self
and the old self.
And the old self. And it's also connected to language of spirit and flesh, living out of the flesh versus living out of the spirit. It's connected to the language of Jesus himself, who talked about death to self. Oh, what is he talking about? That's so confusing. I think there's a thread through all of those ideas that is connected to this. So we're not trying to be completely technically accurate or faithful to any of those particular versions of this, but we're trying to do practical theology. We're trying to actually just help one another with our actual lives. So, given that this is we have a mutual friend, Tim Suttle over at Redemption Church, who calls these not the false self and the true self. He calls it the small self and the large self. Okay. Right? Which helps a little bit with the moralizing language, because anytime we say false self, we're going to immediately say, well, bad. That's bad then. Right. But the truth is, false self isn't bad. It's necessary. It's not the truest self. Yeah. So I have to draw a picture to try to explain this as best I can. And I got this from a mutual mentor years ago. So I'm going to attempt to do this.
Yeah.
You'll have to help me whether or not this is actually helpful or not.
You want me to tell you if it's helpful or not? Okay.
Tell me if this makes any sense.
Okay.
So, this gets a bit abstract, but I don't think it's hard once you get it. We walk around using the pronoun I. And when I say I, there's this question mark of, what do you mean by I? This is already abstract. I'm thinking of Bob Dylan, who said, all I have to be is me, whoever that is.
Right, exactly.
So if we just hang with me. This is just on a concrete level. If we make this box, and we say the word I, I'm going to hold this up. Hopefully the camera can get that. That's okay. I. When I say I, that's what I'm saying. But really, when I say I, what I'm saying is that over here in this other circle are things that I mean when I say I. Mm-hmm. Things like I'm a pastor.
Mm-hmm. Identity. Things I use for my identity.
I'm a husband.
Yeah.
Father.
Mm-hmm.
Rock star. Chiefs fan.
Chiefs hater. I mean, it could be any of the...
Well, let's not talk about...
Okay, all right.
Let's not talk about sinful people.
I totally hear what you're saying, though. I encompasses a lot. Yeah.
So this idea is trying to get at this, that there's a difference between all these roles and things that we use to define who we are and who we truly are. And so what we do in life is we connect all of these attachments from the I. So when I say I, who am I talking about? Am I talking about Chiefs fan I? Am I talking about Republican Democrat I? American, right? All these ways that we use to define who we are. Yeah. So in a sense, I'm just going to put FS over here as false self.
False self, right.
And what happens is something comes along that is strong enough to break all of these ties between the I that I say when I say I and all of these things. And usually that is what we're talking about in this series is a death experience. Mm-hmm. Death comes along and breaks these things. It separates you from family. Mm-hmm. Separates you from job. Yeah. From money.
So if I'm laid off and that job is part of I, then there's a death experience. All of a sudden I'm going, who am I? Who am I? It's like drowning in a deep pool, right?
That's right. And what we do when those ties are broken typically is that we double down and we go around that death experience and we create new attachments to things. So let me give you just a really painful one. A few years ago, I bought a motorcycle. And one of my good friends, who I thought was a good friend, it might have been you, asked me, I said, I got a motorcycle. And the question was, how old are you?
I did not do that. I did not say that. I think a motorcycle is the coolest thing.
Might not have been you.
Yeah.
But you're the type of person who would say that to me. So I appreciate it.
Meaning, is this a midlife crisis?
Is it a midlife crisis? Am I doubling down on identity things because something is painful and separating me from my idea of youth and freedom? Yeah. Okay, so I need to double down and buy a convertible or buy right. So that's cartoonish, but that
totally get it.
And of course, I was doing that out of a pure spiritual exercise and not out of any kind of
You were not having any kind of midlife crisis.
That's right. Yeah. But that's the idea, is that we find our identity in all of these things that can be taken away from us in death. And when one of those is challenged, then we tend to double down in it for comfort, for identity, right? Yeah. So not all of that is bad. It's not bad to be a husband or a father or own a motorcycle. So the Christian life gives us this alternative to doing this, to keep, to double down. And one of the daily readings this week was John 15, where Jesus talks about abide in me. Abide in me. I'll be in you, you'll be in me, I'm in the Father. There's this. Yep. And what that does is it creates this new box that is not tied up in any of this. And this is what we might call the place of abiding. This is the place where, and some ways to talk about it is the Holy Spirit is in us or among us. So I'll just, for abbreviation, put Holy Spirit down here. That when we begin to follow God and surrender ourselves, that we get this other presence in our life that is with us. Jesus said, I'll be with you. If I go away, I'll send an advocate. That was all in this week's reading.
It was, yeah.
And when we learn how to connect to that, then we have a perspective for the first time that is outside of I, that is not this. So no longer do I need to say I and think, how do I know who I am? Well, I have a motorcycle. That's how I know. For the first time, I have a view of myself that is not trapped in this back and forth, but is, who does God say that I am?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So this is from like the last conversation where the Father says to Jesus, you're my Son in whom I am already well pleased.
Yeah.
Before
you do
I've
anything.
created any of this stuff.
Right.
So this is what then we would call true self.
Yeah.
That is defined by Holy Spirit, by God. This is false self. Not bad self, but false self. And you'll know it's false when you hit a death experience that will separate you from all of these.
Yeah. You know, Rustin, that's really good. It was brilliant.
Well, that's not mine, but that's been the best explanation I've seen of it, and that's helped me.
As I tell my congregation all the time, very little of what I say is me. I mean, they can take heart in that. Right? We're borrowing from the best.
Yeah, we're kind of like therapists who go into this business because we need it.
Yeah, right. But that is awesome, and it really helped. For me, it helped me to understand a lot of it, and I hope that that's true for everyone watching. Yeah,
and of course, as we've said during this series, if you get this right and live from here, then you go out and create wonderful things over here. Wonderful families, hopefully wonderful churches.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Well, that's another conversation. But
may it be.
I want to move us along in this conversation, and you know, at Beggars Table, we've been calling this conversation "Squeezed," and the whole idea is that when we are going through a death experience, it squeezes us, and what happens is what's most important about us comes out. So I have heard some people say, I think you've heard some people say, who maybe think that we're spending way too much time on this 7 words of Jesus on the cross.
Yeah.
Like, they're just sentences. Maybe maybe we don't need to focus so much on these things, but my rationale in doing this is that when we watch Jesus on the cross, we're seeing the squeeze take place in him, and what comes out of him is the essence of Jesus, like maybe the most important thing. Right. Just like when we squeeze an orange, it's the juice that comes out. This is the juice of Jesus. Yeah. And my hunch is that the gospel writers in writing the gospels took a lot of time, or at least put a lot of importance on what these words were that Jesus said when he's being squeezed. And we can find the essence of our faith and the essence of who this man is and was through these words. Yeah. And Rustin, I've been doing some work with these words, and we've talked some about this. I really believe that if we look closely and if we want to, we can see these words, the 7 words, as a map of sorts of leaving the false self and living into the true self.
Okay.
In some ways, they're a trajectory. They're a roadmap for us about how to do that. And so what I want to do is take us through that really quick, and then invite your commentary. And of course, people watching us or listening to us, I invite you to have your own conversations about this. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's a progression here from the false self to the true self. So let's begin with the first word, of course, is Father, forgive them.
Forgive.
Yeah, forgiveness.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, this idea of learning how to have relationship and learning how to be in the world and forgive instead of holding on to your opinions, your rightness, your stuff, that's like the first step that we have to learn if we're going to navigate the world at all in any kind of semblance of godliness. I mean, conflict, as I said when I did this sermon, conflict is inevitable. Conflict just happens. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who you marry. It doesn't matter what your kids are like. It doesn't matter where you work. It doesn't matter how nice of a person you are. You're going to have conflict with people. It's part of life. And so if you don't learn how to say, I forgive you, and believe me, I'm not suggesting that's easy. But if you don't learn how to do that, then you're not even going to get out of the gate. It's like the biggest sign that you have not even started to shed the false self is if you cannot forgive.
Yeah. It's easy to see how that could be true. I immediately think of one of my favorite C.S. Lewis lines. He said, everybody thinks forgiveness is a great idea until they have something to forgive.
Yeah, right.
Because we all know it's so hard.
It's hard. It's totally hard.
And it's probably why so much of our faith depends upon that story about forgiveness. It's not only giving but receiving forgiveness. It's that letting go of the past and moving forward becomes kind of the big conversion experience of Christianity.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm with you.
So we start there, and then the next word has to do with our heart, our desire. When we talk about our heart, we sometimes use the language, I think Dallas Willard said this, of our wanter. It's our wanter inside. Yeah. And what we talked about this year when we looked at the truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise, is that what's happening here is we're identifying the desire of the second thief, which was to be with Jesus. Mm-hmm. So you look at the two thieves on the cross that died with Jesus, and you've got two different pictures of desires. And the first thief is probably more like we all naturally are. It's more of a false self thing, where our biggest desire is for ourselves. Our biggest desire is for our protection. It's for our safety. It's for even our being saved on the cross. You know, help me get off the cross as you get off the cross. Save yourself, that kind of thing. Right. You're a fool if you're the Messiah and you don't save yourself. Yeah. But what we see in the second thief is a picture of a changed desire, which is, you know what I want isn't that. I'm not going to ask for anything besides, can I be with you? Yeah. I want to be with you. Yeah. Jesus, don't forget me, and let me be with you.
Which I even see in Jesus' ministry. One of my favorite moments is when he turns to someone and says, what do you want? What do you want me to do for you?
Yeah.
He's going right after that piece.
Exactly.
Maybe that guy's ready for the second step of dealing with his desire.
Jesus notices the disciples following him, and he turns around and says, what is it that you want? Because our wanters are so important. We are creatures of desires. Mm-hmm. And so the desire has to begin to shift into, I want to get, I want to accumulate, I want to succeed, I want to win, which is all, again, this isn't a good bad conversation, but it's all part of that, I find my identity in the false self. I want to be with Jesus. Right. I want you to remember me, Jesus.
Well, and there's a conviction that we have that our deepest desire is always for God. Mm-hmm. And if we press far enough, if we don't settle for the desires that seem evident, underneath the desire to win, to be successful, to be beautiful, to be accepted, all of that is really a desire
for God.
For the divine. Yeah.
So we need to live into that. So my idea is that once we get to the place where we can begin forgiving, then the next thing to address is our wanter, our desires.
Yeah, our wanters need to be reformed.
Yeah. Now, it's only until, this is the thing, it's only until we become people who truly learn to navigate our lives with forgiveness, because the conflict is there. It doesn't matter where you are, who you are, you're going to have conflict. Right. Until we learn to navigate with forgiveness, and until our wanters begin to be shifted away from just our own, for lack of a better word, selfishness, we're not going to understand, let alone maybe even want to be a part of the community around the cross. Because that's the community of the church. Mm-hmm. That's the community that Jesus forms with the third word, where he says, woman, behold your son, and then behold your mother. He's forming the church. And the thing is, this is a community that is for people who are beginning to make this transformation away from the false self. And so that's the next step that we have on this roadmap. Now you're beginning that, so welcome to this community. You're going to be joining with other people who are actually trying to live from humility, right?
Okay.
All right.
A community of practice. So we've gone from forgiveness, to dealing with your desires, to being ready maybe to enter a community that's going to practice this together.
Practices
a community
those.
Of forgiveness.
Yeah, it practices those. That's why the church can be a real odd place for people, and might not just seem immediately accessible because it is very different from the communities of the world that we're usually focused on our own lifestyle. And
well, our friend Jonathan Jones taught me this years ago that community is a discipline. Yeah. And so if you're irritated, it's working.
Yeah, right.
And that's what we're doing. We're learning how to give and receive forgiveness in community.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so for each one of these, we could give full sermons, and I guess we did in a way, but we could do it again. It's so tempting. But we move from that word to the fourth word, which is all of a sudden where almost the rubber hits the road, because now we have, why have you forsaken me? And so what happens is, we begin working on all of these, and as we said, all of us hit that place in our own journey where we are in the dark night of the soul. Yeah. What has been called the dark night of the soul, where it feels like God has abandoned us. And if you remember, I said, I don't really believe God abandons us, but I believe we get to a place where it feels like he has. And we cry out from our heart, where are you? And as we said when we talked about this, counterintuitively, that is a season I believe we all have to go through if we're going to attain any real maturity. We join Jesus in saying that.
And let's be real honest, that's if that's a fourth stage, that naturally does follow entering into community, because so much of our pain and feelings of rejection and abandonment often come from wounds that we receive by living in proximity.
That's right.
With other people.
I agree. And everyone who's been with any church for their life or for a significant amount of time knows that your community will eventually let you down. There's no church community that is going to be your ideal or what you think it should be. Yeah. But however you experience it, you're going to go through this. Where is God? Yeah. And the thing is, even if you're not on this journey, you're probably going to go through that place anyway, unless you're really not in touch with yourself. You'll probably get to the place where you're going, where is God? And unfortunately, a lot of people just say, you know what, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm going to be an atheist or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. But if you're on this journey, then this is, again, it doesn't feel like it, but it is a healthy step that propels you forward.
It doesn't feel like progress, but it actually is.
Yeah, because it's progress into letting go. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. Yeah. We don't think of progress as letting go. Yeah. But this is what we are doing. We're progressing in letting go. So it's counterintuitive. Okay. Yeah. The thing is, if we get to that place where we feel like God has abandoned us, then it opens us up to the fifth word, which is I thirst. In other words, we know the feeling of abandonment, so now we know that we are no longer self-sufficient to take care of ourselves.
Right, and the invitation of that fifth word is to admit our vulnerability, our need for resources that are outside of self.
If we truly go through the word of forsaken, then we arrive at a place where we know that I can't make it without you. I can't make it without you. I can't make it without people. Mm-hmm. I actually have needs. And the thing is, we're so trained, Rustin, to see that giving is a virtue, but receiving is not. Yeah. And can you imagine if a church if you went to a church's website and there was a page that, instead of just talking about the ways we can give, said, here's everything we need. This is what we need. Wouldn't that be amazing? If
I can imagine it being a very small church.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, once we get to this place on this journey of recognizing that I am not completely self-sufficient and that I need you to help me, then we arrive at the sixth word, which is, it is finished, that we talked about last week. And this is where my connection to my identity being, as you diagrammed out, being connected to the things that I do in that bubble that has all the different roles I play, that can be broken, that can be severed, and I realize that that's not who I am. Yeah. I am a child of God, and I'm dearly beloved by God.
The work is finished. I'm not finished. There's the difference between.
Right, which is an amazing place to arrive at, I would imagine, when you can honestly say, you know what, my identity is not the things that I do. It's not what I strive to achieve. It's not the good, and it's not my failures either. None of that stuff is really me. I am this. I am this person.
Yeah. And we could add to that in that false self bubble, it's not only the things that are self-aggrandizing, but they're also the things that are self-diminishing.
Right.
So we are neither our best moments nor our worst moments.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And the thing is, what we've done is we're arriving to the place where God has always known, and who we are that God has always known. We'll talk about the seventh word, then we finally get to the seventh word, which is, I commend my spirit unto you, into your hands I commend my spirit.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, the final surrender. You started out by talking about this is the complete loss of control, or the giving up of control. Yeah. I give control to you, God, which may be the hallmark of the true self, is that I'm not hanging on to my own labels, my own roles, my own work anymore, but I'm able to submit my control to you. And what I was getting at earlier is that what we're doing is we have finally arrived at who God has known we are all the time, because we are always someone who is completely dependent on God. It's just we are living in a state of disillusionment where we don't know that. We believe that we are our achievements, we're what we do, our work and our relationships and everything. Yeah. But God knows you are someone who is dependent on me. And what we haven't created this. We haven't gotten to the seventh word because we've worked to achieve it. We've just arrived at who we've always been. Mm. Yeah.
Which is why the gospel comes to us in such personal ways, because it knocks me off my high horse, right? It's not you're not as big as you think you are, but it also lifts me out of the pit, as the Psalms say, right? Because you're not your failure. You're not stuck in the things that you've failed to achieve either. You're not the false self. You're this immortal diamond that you are who God names you to be.
Yeah. Mm. But to be honest, even having said that, this is a really hard journey, and it's a journey I think that most of us, if we're going to be honest, don't get real far in. Most people, and I say this even thinking of myself, are still all the way back in the first word of forgiveness. Like I'm struggling with forgiveness, and then the wanter, getting my desires to change, I'm struggling with that. And again, I've alluded to this already, but I think it's especially hard for us Americans who grow up in a culture that promotes self-sufficiency. Yeah. And I think that one of the only things that can bring us on this journey is death, because death is ultimately a giving up of all of those things. I mean, I'm watching it happening with my father, who is in his late 80s, and he is diminishing in what he can do and how he can perform. And there are nurses coming to his house now that have to help him talk, have to help him walk, have to help him go to the bathroom. He's giving up. And I just think that that's all hard and it's all dark. But death teaches us who we really are. If we resist it the rest of our lives because we're such competent people, it will eventually teach us, right?
It's true. And I think the end result of this, as scary as it feels for us to give up control, I think hopefully all of us have at least tasted the good side of that. I think of just like, if you had a good childhood or any good day in your childhood where you felt cared for, loved, safe, secure, without tons of responsibility, it's like that was probably one of the best days of your life. Mm-hmm. We all know that it's good to not be in control, to not be weighed down by the responsibility of everything and so much depending upon us. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of comfort in that. So surrender, this idea of surrender, this bequeathing of our will to God, as much as we resist it, there's part of us that also knows, wouldn't it be nice if we could do that? All right, so surrender ultimately is comfort.
I agree. So all that to say, if we allow them to, these 7 words can be a sort of map for us that take us step by step on this journey from false self to true self. And again, it's a hard journey that is, I keep saying this, but it's counterintuitive to who we are. And I think that's one reason why I get so much good feedback about the early sermons in this series. Like, oh, I love that one on forgiveness, because we identify with that.
Yeah.
But as you go on, I don't know if we've said this before or not, but there's not many sermons on I thirst. There's not many sermons on it is finished.
Yeah.
And people aren't as comfortable hearing all of that because it sounds a little strange to us.
That's right. Those early words are intensely practical because we live there almost constantly.
Yeah.
It feels practical to talk about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Because we're always trying to forgive. Once we get into it is finished, or what are these other ones? I thirst. It starts to get more abstract, and we start to get in our heads, and we're theorizing. Well, did Jesus really thirst, or was he? Because we don't live there as much.
Yeah, I think they're threatening.
Yeah,
they're threatening words.
Yeah,
forgiveness isn't as threatening. Let me be with you in paradise isn't as threatening. We're down with the church. When you get to forsaken, you start going, let's just move on to Easter. And but I think they're a little threatening. But they're part of this necessary path.
Yeah.
That what I alluded to when I spoke of my dad is that if we don't start this path consciously on our own, our bodies will eventually take us there, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and if there's a way maybe to wrap this up with an encouraging word, as we all inevitably walk into death, it's that this image of Jesus on the cross, he's the one leading us through this, and he's the one on the cross, which to me is a message that no matter what point we are on this journey, depending on the time of day, Jesus is with us.
Totally. And he has promised us abundant life.
Yeah.
Through the journey, but at the end of the journey too, which is, of course, gives all the meaning to Easter. But
that's right.
But there's something amazing for us.
That's right.
The loss of control is not a curse.
Yeah.
It's a blessing.
Well, I think of Hebrews that for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross. And so what he's doing by offering us these 7 words is setting before us a joy that is promised. And because of that, I feel like there's some access to joy even in the suffering along the way.
Yeah, I definitely do not speak as someone who's arrived. Let me tell you what it's like to fully live into the 7th word. I'm not there, but we are people who have that joy before us and who have tasted it. Yeah.
Well, John, may it be for you and for Beggars Table, and for Vox, joy on the journey with Jesus. Amen.
Amen.